The night before the road begins, you sleep beneath a rough wooden shelter at the edge of a Roman settlement, listening to rain tapping steadily against the roof, while somewhere beyond the darkness hundreds of trees stand waiting to be cut down. By sunrise, the forest will no longer feel like a forest. It will become the beginning of another road, another line of stone stretching through the empire, another project ordered by men who may never see the place where their commands are carried out. You are a Roman road builder, and your work begins long before the first stone is placed. There are no grand speeches waiting for you, no marble monument with your name carved into it, and certainly no promise that anyone in Rome will ever know who built the road beneath their soldiers' feet. Your reward is a daily ration of bread, a little wine, perhaps some salted meat when supplies are good, and the knowledge that tomorrow you will wake before sunrise and perform almost exactly the same exhausting work. The road must continue. That is all that matters. When the first pale light appears between the trees, you step outside into cold mud and find dozens of laborers already gathering beside piles of tools. Some carry iron picks, others shovels, wooden mallets, baskets, ropes, measuring rods, and heavy axes. Engineers and surveyors stand farther ahead studying the terrain, arguing quietly over the best route through the forest. They are educated men who understand mathematics, measurements, slopes, drainage, and the geometry necessary to force a straight Roman road across landscapes that seem determined to resist it. You understand something simpler. You understand how heavy a stone becomes after carrying it for several hours. You understand how quickly hands blister beneath rough wooden handles. You understand the sound a man's body makes when he drops exhausted onto the ground after a day spent lifting rocks. The surveyors point toward the horizon and announce that the road must eventually reach a distant military settlement. To them, the distance is measured in miles. To you, it is measured in thousands of stones, countless steps, aching shoulders, broken tools, wet clothes, and mornings when your body refuses to rise but rises anyway because the overseer is already shouting. The first task is clearing the forest. Trees that have stood for generations must be removed so the road can pass through. Axes strike trunks repeatedly, each impact echoing through the cold morning air. Large branches fall into the mud while smaller workers drag them away and pile them beside the planned route. Some trees resist for hours, their roots gripping the earth as though the forest itself refuses to surrender. Eventually they fall with enormous crashes, shaking the ground beneath your feet. You barely have time to watch them disappear before the next tree is marked. By midday, your hands are already raw. Sawdust sticks to your damp clothing, sweat runs down your back despite the cold air, and the smell of freshly cut wood fills the forest. Yet clearing trees is only the beginning. Once the land is exposed, the real labor begins. The engineers measure the ground again and again, determining where the road must rise, where it must descend, and where drainage channels must be carved to prevent rainwater from destroying the surface. A Roman road cannot simply be a flat path of stones thrown across the earth. It must survive seasons of rain, marching armies, carts loaded with supplies, merchants transporting goods, and thousands of feet traveling over it year after year. Beneath the surface, layers of carefully arranged material must be created. Large stones form the foundation. Smaller rocks fill the spaces between them. Gravel and sand create additional layers before the final paving stones are placed. Every layer requires labor. Every layer requires movement. Every layer requires someone to carry the material from somewhere else. This means the road you see stretching ahead is only the visible part of an enormous structure buried beneath your feet. For hours you carry baskets of stones from one growing pile to another, walking back and forth until the distance between them feels endless. Your shoulders burn. Your knees ache. Mud covers your sandals. When rain begins falling in the afternoon, the work does not stop. The stones become slippery, the ground becomes heavier, and every step becomes more difficult. You look toward the engineers standing beneath a covered shelter and wonder whether they understand what their measurements feel like when translated into physical labor. Perhaps they do. Perhaps they simply have different responsibilities. Either way, the road must be finished. As darkness approaches, the workers finally receive permission to stop. There is no warm bath waiting. There is no comfortable bed. You return to the same rough shelter where several exhausted men are already lying beneath thin blankets. Someone passes around a small amount of bread and watered wine. Conversation is quiet because everyone is too tired to speak loudly. One worker has a swollen hand. Another has a deep cut across his forearm from a broken tool. A third simply stares into the small fire, unable to keep his eyes open. Tomorrow the same work begins again. And the day after that. And the day after that. Perhaps months from now, when the road is finally complete, soldiers will march across it without ever thinking about the people who built it. Merchants will complain when their carts move slowly. Officials will measure distances between towns. Couriers will ride horses across the finished surface carrying messages toward distant provinces. Generals will use the road to move armies faster than their enemies expect. Travelers will stop beside milestones and wonder how such a road could possibly have been constructed through forests, hills, valleys, and rivers. None of them will see your hands. None will know your name. They will simply see the road. And that is the strange fate of the Roman road builder. You spend your life creating something that will outlive you by centuries, perhaps millennia, while your own existence disappears almost immediately beneath the stones you placed. As you finally lie down beneath the dark wooden roof that night, the rain continues falling outside, washing mud from the unfinished road and filling the newly carved drainage channels. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls from the forest. Tomorrow the axes will begin again. The stones will need carrying. The engineers will demand another section completed. And slowly, one exhausting day after another, a road will emerge from the wilderness. A road that will connect cities, move armies, carry merchants, and help hold together one of the greatest empires the ancient world has ever known. But tonight, beneath a leaking roof with aching hands and a body too tired to move, the empire feels very far away. All you can hear is the rain, the breathing of exhausted workers around you, and the quiet realization that tomorrow morning, before Rome wakes, you will already be working. The first morning of construction begins beneath a sky so gray that it seems the sun has forgotten the workers entirely. You wake before the camp's small fire has completely died, your body already aching from yesterday's labor even though the road has barely begun. Around you, dozens of men slowly emerge from rough shelters made from timber, woven branches, and pieces of worn cloth, each moving with the stiff, careful movements of people whose muscles have not recovered from the previous day. Nobody speaks much at first. There is no reason to waste energy before the work begins. A few men crouch beside the dying fire and warm their hands while others tighten leather straps around worn sandals, repair broken tool handles, or wrap strips of cloth around blistered palms. Breakfast is simple and barely enough to make the coming hours seem possible. Coarse bread, a handful of olives, watered wine, and occasionally a little salted meat when the supply wagon has arrived on time. You eat quickly because the overseer is already walking between the shelters, shouting for everyone to gather their tools. The Roman road cannot wait for hungry men to feel ready. It has already been ordered, measured, and approved by officials hundreds of miles away, and somewhere in a distant administrative office, a wax tablet probably records the expected date of completion. To the men standing in the mud this morning, however, that date means very little. They know only that another enormous section of Earth must be cleared before sunset. As you walk toward the construction site, the forest seems almost endless. Tall trees disappear into the mist, their branches dripping with water from the previous night's rain. The planned road cuts directly through this wilderness, and the first survey markers stand like thin wooden stakes driven into the ground at long intervals. Engineers move between them carrying measuring rods and ropes, carefully checking the alignment while several assistants hold equipment steady. Their instructions are precise. The road must follow a particular direction, the width must remain consistent, and the slope cannot become too steep for heavily loaded wagons. You sometimes wonder how men sitting comfortably beside maps in distant Roman offices decided that a road should pass through a place like this. Perhaps from their perspective the route looks simple. A line drawn across parchment appears perfectly straight. On the ground, that same line means cutting through forests, leveling hills, filling depressions, moving enormous stones, building bridges, and draining water from places where water naturally wants to remain. The first hours are spent removing trees. You take your position beside several other workers and begin swinging a heavy iron axe against a thick trunk marked with red paint. The first strikes barely seem to damage the bark. You strike again and again, each impact sending vibrations through your arms. The sound echoes through the forest, joined by dozens of other axes striking other trees. Soon the entire woodland seems filled with the rhythm of Roman construction. Men shout warnings when a tree begins to lean. Everyone moves away. The trunk finally collapses with a tremendous crack, branches smashing through smaller trees as it falls. For a moment there is silence. Then the overseer points toward another tree. The fallen trunk must be cut into sections and dragged away before the next one can be removed. There is no admiration for the tree that has just fallen, no pause to appreciate the work. It is simply another obstacle. By late morning, the forest floor has become a battlefield of branches, roots, mud, and discarded pieces of timber. Your clothes are soaked with sweat despite the cold temperature, and your hands sting beneath the cloth wrapped around them. You would like to rest, but the workers assigned to clearing the ground are already beginning the next stage. Roots must be removed. Large stones must be dug from the earth. Uneven ground must be leveled. The road cannot simply be placed on top of the natural landscape. The landscape must first be forced to accept it. You take a shovel and begin digging around a massive root that seems determined to remain buried. Every time you remove a layer of soil, another thick section of root appears beneath it. Several men eventually join you, using iron tools to loosen the surrounding earth. After nearly an hour, the root finally comes free, leaving behind a hole large enough to swallow a man's leg. You stare at it for a moment before realizing that the hole itself must now be filled. Nothing about road building is ever finished with a single action. Every task creates another task. Remove the tree and you must remove the roots. Remove the roots and you must fill the holes. Fill the holes and you must compact the ground. Compact the ground and you must measure it again. Measure it and the engineer may decide that the entire section is too low and needs additional material. The road seems to grow through an endless chain of labor in which every completed task immediately creates another responsibility. Around midday, carts begin arriving from a nearby stone quarry. Their wheels sink deeply into the muddy ground under the weight of enormous rocks. Oxen strain against their harnesses while drivers shout and pull at reins, desperately trying to keep the carts from sliding sideways. The workers immediately begin unloading the stones. Some are large enough to require several men working together. Others are smaller but equally exhausting because hundreds of them are needed. You join a group carrying stones toward the roadbed, lifting each piece onto a wooden platform before dragging it across the prepared ground. The stone is cold and rough beneath your hands. After only a short distance, your shoulders begin burning. Yet the journey must be repeated again and again. There are no machines capable of doing this work for you. Roman engineers possess impressive technology for their time, but the strength of human bodies remains the foundation of almost everything they build. Cranes can lift certain loads, carts can transport others, and pulleys can make difficult tasks slightly easier, but somewhere beneath every Roman achievement are thousands of tired people carrying, digging, pulling, cutting, hammering, and lifting. The road is beginning to take shape now. Beneath your feet, the first foundation layer of large stones is being carefully arranged. Workers fill gaps with smaller rocks, creating a strong base that will eventually support the upper layers. Engineers walk along the section inspecting the work and occasionally ordering stones removed because they do not fit correctly. You watch one worker become frustrated after an engineer rejects an entire section he spent hours constructing. The man stares at the stones in disbelief before quietly beginning again. There is no argument. The engineer has authority, and the road must meet the required standard. Somewhere beyond the construction site, the first merchants are already waiting for this route to open. Soldiers stationed in distant forts will eventually depend upon it for supplies. Government messengers will ride along it carrying orders from one province to another. Tax collectors will use it to reach settlements. Officials will travel across it in comfortable carriages while discussing politics and administration. Every one of those people will benefit from the road. Almost none will ever think about the workers who built it. The afternoon becomes colder as clouds gather above the forest. Rain begins slowly at first, falling in thin drops that darken the stones. The overseer looks toward the sky but does not order anyone to stop. The workers simply pull their cloaks tighter and continue. Soon the rain becomes heavier. Mud sticks to your sandals and makes every step harder. Tools become slippery. The stone foundation turns dark beneath the water. You carry another load toward the road while rain runs down your face, mixing with sweat and dirt. The man walking beside you slips suddenly, dropping his stones into the mud. For a few seconds, he simply sits there, breathing heavily. Then another worker reaches down and helps him stand. Neither says anything. There is no time. Together they pick up the stones and continue. The second week of construction begins with a problem that makes everyone understand just how little the road cares about human exhaustion. The section ahead must cross a broad valley where rainwater gathers naturally between two low hills, and after several days of heavy weather the ground has become a deep field of mud that swallows sandals almost to the ankle. The engineers stand at the edge of the valley studying their measurements while workers wait nearby with shovels, baskets, ropes, and wooden tools, already knowing that whatever solution the engineers choose will eventually become their burden. You are told that the road cannot simply follow the natural shape of the valley because the route has been ordered to remain as direct as possible. A Roman road is expected to conquer distance rather than surrender to it. Instead of bending around every obstacle, it must cross them. Hills are cut through, valleys are filled, rivers are bridged, and forests are removed until the landscape begins to resemble the straight lines drawn on an engineer's tablet. This morning, the plan is to raise the roadbed above the wet ground by creating a massive embankment. To accomplish it, Thousands of baskets of earth and stone must be carried from higher ground and placed into the valley. The work sounds simple when explained by the chief engineer. Take soil from there, carry it here, spread it evenly, compact it, repeat. But standing at the bottom of the valley with a basket digging into your shoulder, you quickly understand that the word repeat is the most important part of the entire instruction. You begin before the sun has fully climbed above the hills. Workers form long lines between the excavation area and the future road, passing baskets from one person to another in a slow, exhausting rhythm. Some men dig, others carry. Others spread the material across the roadbed using wooden rakes and shovels. The same movements are repeated hundreds of times until the mind begins to lose track of how long the day has lasted. Your feet sink into wet ground with every step, and the leather straps of your sandals become covered in mud. Every few minutes someone stops to empty water from their shoes, only to put them back on and continue. There is no shortcut. The embankment must rise high enough to keep future travelers above the wet valley floor. If it settles too much, carts will become trapped during rainy seasons. If it is built too steeply, heavy wagons may struggle to climb it. If the material is not compacted properly, the entire road could weaken beneath years of traffic. The engineers understand these dangers. The workers understand only that every basket must be carried. By midday, the sun finally appears, and the wet valley transforms into a suffocating basin of heat and mud. The cool morning disappears almost instantly. Sweat runs down your face while you lift another basket onto your shoulder. The earth inside is heavier than it looked when you filled it. You walk slowly up the growing embankment and dump the load where an overseer points. Then you turn around and walk back, again, and again, and again. Around you, men begin coughing from dust as the upper layers dry beneath the sun. Others develop raw shoulders where wooden handles and baskets rub against their skin. One older worker quietly collapses beside the excavation pit. For several moments, nobody notices because everyone is moving. Eventually, a nearby laborer sees him and calls for help. Two men carry him toward the shade while the overseer orders someone else to take his place. The work continues almost immediately. This is perhaps the hardest lesson of road building. Individual workers can stop, but the project cannot. The road has its own momentum. Every day lost means more expense for the authorities, more delays for merchants and soldiers, and more complaints from officials who measure progress using numbers rather than tired bodies. By afternoon, the embankment has risen noticeably above the valley floor. From the top, you can see the forest you cleared several days earlier stretching behind you, its remaining trees forming a dark wall along the horizon. Ahead lies another obstacle. A narrow river cuts directly across the planned route. It is not large enough to impress anyone standing beside it, yet it is strong enough to destroy an unfinished road during heavy rain. The engineers have already decided that a small stone bridge will be constructed. This means your work changes again. The baskets disappear temporarily, replaced by ropes, chisels, wooden scaffolding, and heavy blocks of stone transported from the quarry. The bridge foundations must reach solid ground beneath the soft riverbank, forcing workers to dig deep trenches beside rushing water. You spend the rest of the afternoon standing knee-deep in mud, while several men attempt to position large foundation stones without allowing the current to push them away. Thick ropes are tied around the stones and pulled by teams of workers standing on the riverbank. The command is shouted. Everyone pulls together. The stone moves a little. Then the rope slips. The entire group stumbles backward. Someone curses under his breath. The engineer orders the rope adjusted and the process begins again. After several attempts, the first foundation stone finally settles into place. It looks insignificant compared with the enormous bridge that will eventually rise above it. But everyone understands that this small piece is the beginning of something that must survive decades of floods. You stand nearby watching the river flow around the stone and realize how strange Roman construction can be. The road exists partly to make travel faster, yet building it forces you to move slower than you have ever moved in your life. A traveler will cross this bridge in seconds. You may spend weeks making those few seconds possible. As evening approaches, the workers begin cleaning tools while engineers inspect the foundation. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoes across the river. Everyone freezes. One of the wooden supports holding the temporary scaffolding has shifted under the weight of a stone block. Several workers rush forward to stabilize it before the structure collapses. For a terrifying moment, the entire platform tilts toward the water. A man standing on the edge loses his footing and falls into the shallow river. Fortunately, he disappears beneath the surface only briefly before two workers pull him out. He is bruised and terrified but alive. The engineer orders the entire section evacuated until the supports can be reinforced. Nobody speaks much afterward. Accidents are never completely unexpected on a Roman construction site. Everyone has seen broken bones, crushed fingers, deep cuts, and men carried away after falling from scaffolding. Yet every close call reminds the workers that the road is dangerous long before it becomes useful. When darkness finally arrives, the river reflects the first stars above the valley. The unfinished embankment stands like a long artificial hill cutting through the landscape, while the beginnings of the bridge remain hidden beneath rough wooden supports. You return to camp soaked from the knees down and exhausted beyond description. A few men sit around the fire discussing the road ahead. Someone says the next section will require cutting through a hillside. Another says the quarry has run low on suitable stone. Someone else laughs bitterly and says there will always be another problem because there is always another part of the road. You lie down beneath your blanket and listen to the distant sound of the river. Your body aches in places you did not know could ache. Yet somewhere inside the exhaustion there is also a strange feeling of satisfaction. For the first time, you can look backward and see a road beginning to emerge. The cleared forest, the raised embankment, the stone foundation beside the river, they are all pieces of something larger. You cannot yet imagine travelers using it. You cannot imagine merchants rushing along it or soldiers marching toward distant provinces. Right now, it is simply a long strip of mud, stone, timber, and sweat. But one day it will become a Roman road. One day someone will stand upon this bridge without knowing who placed the first stone beneath the water. One day a messenger. The third stage of the road begins where the valley finally disappears behind you and the landscape rises sharply into a long, unforgiving hillside that seems almost deliberately designed to test the patience of every man assigned to the project. From the bottom, the route looks impossible. The engineers have marked a narrow line across the slope, but between that line and the summit stands a wall of earth, stone, roots, and dense vegetation. The road cannot simply climb straight upward because heavily loaded carts would struggle against such a steep incline. So the engineers have decided to cut a broad terrace into the hillside, removing enormous quantities of earth and stone until the road can cross at a manageable angle. To the men who will perform the work, however, the plan means weeks of digging. Before sunrise, you stand beneath the dark outline of the hill, watching small fires burn around the construction camp as workers prepare their tools. The air is colder here than it was in the valley, and a strong wind moves through the trees carrying the smell of wet soil and pine. Somewhere behind you, the half-finished bridge remains hidden in the darkness. while ahead lies the next obstacle that Rome has decided must be conquered. You lift your worn pickaxe and begin climbing. The first blows strike solid rock almost immediately. The sound of iron against stone echoes across the hillside, joined by dozens of other workers attacking the earth from different positions. Every strike sends a sharp vibration through your wrists. Small fragments of rock break loose and fall toward the lower slope where other men gather them into baskets. The work is slow because the hill refuses to cooperate. Roots wrap around stones, water seeps from cracks, and sections of soil collapse whenever too much material is removed too quickly. Engineers constantly monitor the slope, warning workers not to dig beyond certain markers. A mistake could send tons of earth sliding downward and bury everyone beneath it. Yet the greatest difficulty is not the danger. It is the repetition. You strike the same section of rock hundreds of times and seem to make almost no progress. By midday, your hands are trembling from exhaustion. Your shoulders feel heavy, and dust has covered your face until you barely recognize yourself. The overseer walks past shouting for faster work, reminding everyone that the road must reach the next settlement before winter. You look at the hill and wonder how anyone could possibly believe that deadline. But the Romans have built an empire on refusing to accept impossible terrain. If the road cannot pass through the hill will be changed until the road can pass. That philosophy is written into every piece of stone beneath your feet. Around noon, teams of laborers begin using wooden wedges to separate larger rocks from the hillside. Holes are drilled into the stone, wooden wedges are inserted, and water is poured over them. As the wood expands, pressure slowly builds inside the cracks until enormous pieces of rock finally split apart with deep, violent sounds that echo through the valley. The workers cheer briefly when the first large section breaks free, but celebration lasts only seconds. The shattered rock must now be removed. Hundreds of baskets are carried away by hand. Some workers use sledges pulled by oxen to move the largest pieces, while others break them into smaller fragments with heavy hammers. The road slowly appears where the hillside once stood. By afternoon, the work becomes even more exhausting because the sun reaches directly into the newly cut slope, turning the exposed stone into a furnace. There is almost no shade. You carry another basket of rubble down the incline, your sandals slipping against loose gravel. Several men stumble throughout the day, and one worker falls hard enough to injure his ankle. He is carried toward the camp while another man quietly takes his place. There is no shortage of people waiting for work, and the road cannot pause for one injured body. That thought troubles you more than you admit. Every day you see men replaced as easily as broken tools. The empire is enormous, and there are always more workers somewhere. To Rome, the road is an investment. To the men building it, the road is their entire existence. Late in the afternoon, a group of engineers arrives carrying measuring equipment. They stop at the highest completed section and carefully inspect the slope. After several minutes of discussion, one of them points toward the ground and orders another section removed. The road is currently too steep. You stare at the area they indicate and feel something inside you sink. The section they want removed took nearly 3 days to create. Now it must be lowered again. Several workers exchange tired looks but immediately return to their tools. There is no point arguing. The road must be correct. You begin digging once more. As evening approaches, the sky turns orange beyond the distant hills, and long shadows stretch across the unfinished road. From the higher position, you can finally see how much progress has been made. The road now extends from the forest far behind you, crossing the valley, reaching the bridge, and climbing steadily toward the hillside. For the first time, the project looks less like random labor and more like a real road. You stand quietly for a moment, imagining what it might look like when finished. Perhaps one day a Roman legion will march across this exact section. Hundreds of soldiers moving in disciplined formation while their commanders barely notice the slope beneath their sandals. Perhaps a merchant will complain that his cart is too heavy. Perhaps a courier will ride past at full speed carrying a message from a distant governor. None will know that the road beneath them was created by men who spent weeks cutting the hill apart one basket of stone at a time. As darkness approaches, the final tools are collected. The workers descend toward camp slowly, too tired to speak. You stop beside a small stream to wash dust from your face and hands. The water turns gray as dirt disappears from your skin. Looking into the reflection, you see a face that already appears older than it did when construction began. Your hair is covered with dust. Your eyes are surrounded by dark circles, and your hands are scarred from weeks of labor. You wonder how much longer the project will continue and whether your body will remain strong enough to see the finished road. Camp, the evening meal is waiting. It is another simple bowl of grain, vegetables, and bread. But after a day of hard labor, it tastes better than any feast could. Around the fire, the workers begin discussing rumors. A merchant passing through the nearby settlement claims that Rome plans to extend the road even farther after this section is complete. Another man says the engineers are already considering a route across the next mountain range. Everyone laughs at the idea. Nobody wants to imagine another mountain. Yet deep down, you know the rumor is probably true. Roads have a way of continuing. Every completed section creates a reason to build another. Once one settlement is connected, another begins demanding access. Once soldiers can travel faster to one frontier, commanders want the same advantage somewhere else. Once merchants discover a profitable route, they ask for another. The empire keeps expanding, and the roads expand with it. As you lie beneath the shelter that night, the wind moves through the trees above you, and the unfinished hillside remains somewhere beyond the darkness. Your body is exhausted, but your mind refuses to sleep. You think about the strange contradiction of your life. You are spending your youth destroying landscapes so that other people can cross them more easily. You cut forests so travelers can avoid them. You move mountains so carts can climb them. You redirect rivers so soldiers can cross them. You create roads that make distance disappear for everyone except the people who build them. For travelers, the road will mean speed. For merchants, it will mean profit. For soldiers, it will mean movement. For Rome, it will mean power. For you, it means another sunrise, another pickaxe, another basket of stone, and another day spent turning impossible terrain into something. The fourth stage of the road begins with a problem that none of the workers expected to face so soon. After weeks of cutting through forest, filling valleys, constructing the first bridge, and slowly carving a path across the hillside, the road finally reaches a wide stretch of open land where the terrain appears almost perfect. From a distance, it looks like the easiest section of the entire project. There are no enormous trees to remove, no steep cliffs to cut through, and no river demanding another bridge. The ground seems flat enough for the road to continue toward the distant settlement without much difficulty. But the engineers quickly discover what the workers cannot see from the surface. Beneath the soft earth lies a deep layer of unstable soil that becomes almost impossible to compact properly. Every time a section of the roadbed is raised, the ground slowly sinks beneath its weight. The first warning comes after several days of work when a newly constructed section collapses overnight, leaving a long depression where the road had appeared almost finished the previous evening. At sunrise, You stand beside the damaged section with dozens of other workers while the chief engineer studies the ground in silence. Nobody speaks. Everyone already understands what his expression means. The work must be done again. The stones must be removed, the soil excavated deeper, and the foundation rebuilt from the beginning. For the workers, this is one of the most frustrating moments of the entire project. There is something psychologically exhausting about destroying work that took days to complete simply because the ground beneath it refuses to cooperate. You had carried those stones yourself. You had watched other men unload them, arrange them, and compact them carefully. You had believed the road was finally becoming solid. Now all of it must disappear. The overseer gives the order, and the first men begin removing the stones. You pick up your tools and join them. There is no anger left in you, only resignation. Roman roads are built to last, and if that requires rebuilding the same section 3 times, then 3 times it will be rebuilt. The foundation is everything. A beautiful surface means nothing if the earth beneath it shifts. You spend the next several days digging deep trenches across the entire route, removing layers of unstable soil until the workers finally reach harder ground. The deeper you dig, the more difficult the work becomes. Water begins appearing beneath the surface, filling the trenches faster than you can empty them. Workers form lines carrying baskets of wet earth away, while others construct temporary channels to redirect the water toward a lower part of the field. The project begins to resemble a giant battle against the landscape itself. Every natural feature must be controlled. Water must be redirected. Soil must be removed. Stones must be placed. The road must remain exactly where the engineers have decided it belongs. You begin to understand why Roman roads can survive for generations. Their strength does not come from simply placing large stones on the ground. It comes from everything hidden underneath. The visible surface is only the final layer of an enormous amount of invisible labor. Once the unstable earth has been removed, the engineers order large foundation stones to be brought from the quarry. These stones are heavier than anything you have handled before. Ox carts struggle to transport them across the muddy fields, and sometimes the animals stop completely, refusing to pull another step. Workers shout, push, and pull at the wheels while drivers desperately try to keep the carts moving. On one particularly difficult morning, one of the largest carts becomes stuck so deeply that its wheels disappear halfway into the mud. Everyone is ordered to help. Thick ropes are tied around the cart, and dozens of men pull together while several others dig away the mud beneath the wheels. The command is shouted. Everyone leans backward. For a moment, nothing happens. Then the cart moves suddenly, throwing several workers onto the ground. The stone load remains secure, and after a brief moment of laughter, the men stand and continue. Small moments like this are among the only things that make the work bearable. A joke, a shared meal, a helping hand, a few seconds of laughter after something goes wrong. Without those moments, the endless labor would become almost impossible to endure. As the foundation progresses, another challenge appears. The road must be wide enough for 2 large carts to pass each other without difficulty. But the surrounding terrain becomes increasingly narrow as the route approaches another wooded ridge. The engineers debate whether to widen the road by cutting further into the hillside or narrow the route and risk future congestion. Eventually, the decision is made. More of the hillside must be removed. You cannot help thinking that the road has become an enormous creature that consumes whatever stands in its way. Forests, hills, fields, streams, and valleys all disappear beneath its path. You spend another week cutting trees and breaking stones. moving deeper into the ridge while the road slowly advances. One afternoon, while clearing a particularly steep section, a large rock suddenly breaks loose above the workers. Someone shouts a warning, and everyone looks upward. The stone begins rolling down the slope faster than anyone expects. Several men manage to jump aside, but one younger worker is struck and falls heavily into the dirt. The rock continues past him before finally stopping against a tree. For a moment, nobody moves. Then the others rush toward the injured man. His leg is badly damaged, but he is alive. The camp physician arrives and examines him while the overseer orders the work stopped in that section until the slope can be secured. You watch the young man being carried away and realize once again how quickly the road can take something from the people building it. A broken tool can be replaced. A damaged cart can be repaired. A worker cannot always be replaced so easily, even if the Empire behaves as though he can. That evening, the camp is unusually quiet. The workers sit around the fire speaking in low voices about the accident. Someone says the young man's family lives several days away. Another wonders whether the authorities will send money to support them. Nobody knows. The road continues regardless. The following morning, the same hillside waits beneath the pale sunrise, and the workers return to their tools. You find yourself looking at the slope differently now. Every stone seems capable of falling. Every tree appears heavier. Every movement feels slightly more dangerous. Yet fear cannot become an excuse for stopping. The engineers strengthen the hillside using wooden supports and carefully remove unstable sections before work resumes. By midday, the road has advanced another several meters. It is a strange rhythm. Danger, recovery, labor, progress, danger again. Weeks pass almost unnoticed. The seasons begin changing around you while the road continues forward. The first green shoots appear along the cleared sections of earth, slowly reclaiming spaces where trees once stood. Rain fills the drainage channels and tests the foundations. The workers repair damaged sections as soon as problems appear. At night, you sometimes walk along the unfinished road alone, carrying a small oil lamp and looking at the rows of stones beneath your feet. In the darkness, the road seems endless. You can barely see where it begins or where it will eventually end. But during the day, from the highest point of the hillside, you can finally see the larger picture. Behind you lies the forest you cleared, the valley you filled, the bridge you built, and the long slope you carved into the earth. Ahead, the road continues toward distant fields where another settlement waits. For the first time, you realize that the project is no longer merely an idea. It has become a permanent feature of the landscape. Even unfinished, it already looks as though it belongs there. Travelers have begun using the completed sections. By the time the fifth stage of the road begins, the workers have stopped measuring progress in days and started measuring it in seasons. The forest behind you has begun to disappear beneath young grass and weeds. The valley embankment has settled into the landscape. The stone bridge now stands firmly above the river, and the long hillside cut has become a permanent scar stretching across the earth. Yet the road is still far from complete. The next section presents a different kind of misery, one that cannot be solved simply by swinging a pickaxe or carrying another basket of stones. The route must now cross a broad river whose waters are calm during most of the year but become violent whenever heavy rain arrives in the distant mountains. The engineers have spent weeks studying the river, measuring its depth, watching the current, and examining the banks for the strongest foundations. Eventually, they announce that a large stone bridge will be required. Unlike the small crossing built earlier, this bridge will need multiple arches strong enough to support carts, horses, soldiers, and enormous supply wagons for generations. The announcement is met with silence among the workers because everyone understands what it means. Building a road is exhausting. Building a bridge means standing beside deep water while moving enormous stones above your head. The first task is preparing the foundations. Wooden piles are driven deep into the riverbed to create temporary working platforms, and teams of laborers spend long hours standing in cold water while ropes are tied around massive stones. You are assigned to one of these crews. Before sunrise, you step into the river wearing clothes that will remain wet for most of the day. The water is colder than you expected. Within minutes, your legs become numb, and every movement feels slower. Yet the work continues. Workers carry stones toward the edge of the temporary platform, while others use ropes and wooden levers to lower them carefully into position. The river constantly pushes against everything you build. A stone that weighs hundreds of kilograms on dry ground becomes dangerously difficult to control once suspended above moving water. One mistake can crush a foot, break a hand, or send the entire load crashing into the river. You quickly learn to fear the sound of a rope stretching under pressure. When the fibers begin making a deep creaking noise, everyone steps away until the load can be stabilized. The engineers stand above the river giving instructions, their voices often disappearing beneath the noise of water, tools, and shouting workers. Every stone must be placed correctly because once the foundations disappear beneath the river, repairs will become almost impossible. Days turn into weeks. Your skin becomes permanently wrinkled from repeated exposure to water, and your hands remain cold even beside the evening fire. The workers begin wrapping strips of wool around their legs before entering the river, but the protection does little. At night, you sit close to the fire with your feet stretched toward the flames while someone rubs oil into cracked skin. There is no medicine strong enough to remove the exhaustion. There is only sleep, and even sleep is interrupted by the knowledge that tomorrow the river will still be waiting. One morning, the weather changes suddenly. Dark clouds appear beyond the mountains, and the river begins rising before the rain even reaches the construction site. The engineers immediately order the workers out of the water. Everyone climbs onto the riverbank while the current grows stronger and faster. Within hours, the water level rises dramatically, carrying branches and pieces of broken wood downstream. The temporary wooden structures shake beneath the force of the current. One of the platforms begins to tilt. Workers rush toward the ropes and attempt to secure it, but the river is too powerful. The structure breaks apart and disappears beneath the brown water. Everyone watches helplessly as days of work are swept away within minutes. The chief engineer is furious, but even he understands that the river has won this battle. The construction must stop until the water falls. For several days, the workers are forced to wait. Waiting is almost as frustrating as working. There is nothing useful to do at the bridge, yet the camp remains crowded because nobody is permitted to leave. Some men repair tools, others cut firewood. A few gamble with small coins beside the shelters. Most simply stare toward the river. You spend one afternoon walking along the bank and notice how completely different the river looks compared with the day construction began. What had seemed like a manageable stream has transformed into a powerful moving wall. You realize that the engineers were never truly building against the river itself. They were building against time, weather, and the possibility that nature could erase months of labor in a single night. When the water finally begins falling, the reconstruction starts immediately. The damaged platform must be rebuilt, stronger than before. Additional wooden supports are driven into the riverbed, and the workers return to the cold water. This time you notice something different among the men. Nobody complains about the work. The previous flood has taught everyone to respect the river. They move more carefully, check every rope twice, and communicate constantly before lifting each stone. Even the youngest workers understand that speed is useless if carelessness destroys everything. Slowly, the first foundations become visible above the water. Large stone blocks are fitted together with extraordinary precision, creating the base upon which the bridge's future arches will rise. You are amazed by the patience required. A single stone may take hours to position correctly, yet when it finally settles into place it appears almost insignificant. Hundreds of such pieces will eventually form a structure capable of standing for centuries. As the months continue, the first arch begins to take shape. Wooden supports are constructed beneath it, creating a curved framework over which carefully cut stones are placed one by one. The central stone is reserved for the final moment. Everyone understands its importance. Until that stone is placed, the arch remains unstable. When the day finally arrives, workers gather around the bridge while the engineers supervise the lifting. Ropes tighten. Wooden cranes creak. The final stone rises slowly into the air. For several terrifying moments it hangs above the arch while everyone watches in silence. Then it is lowered into position. The moment it settles, the entire structure seems to become one solid piece. The workers release a collective cheer that echoes across the river. For perhaps the first time since construction began, you feel genuine pride. Not because the work is finished, it is nowhere near finished, but because something impossible now stands before you. A bridge exists where there was once only water. That evening, the workers gather around the fire and speak more than usual. Someone jokes that future travelers will probably complain about how long it took to cross the bridge. Another man laughs and says they should be forced to carry one stone before crossing. Everyone laughs because the idea feels completely reasonable. You look toward the river where the unfinished arches glow beneath the last light of sunset and think about how strange it is that human beings can spend months fighting nature simply to create a path that someone else will cross in a few minutes. Yet perhaps that is exactly what makes the work meaningful. The road does not belong to you. The bridge does not belong to the workers. Once finished, they will belong to everyone. Soldiers will cross them. Merchants will make money because of them. Families will travel more safely because of them. Messages will arrive sooner. Grain will reach distant towns. Roman officials will move between provinces with greater ease. The empire will become smaller because distance will become easier to overcome. But tonight, none of that matters. Tonight you are simply a tired road builder sitting beside a river, staring at a bridge that has cost you months of cold mornings, wet clothes, aching muscles, and dangerous work. The fire warms your hands while the river moves quietly. The sixth stage of the road begins after the Great River Bridge has finally become strong enough to carry the first test carts. But instead of bringing relief, its completion only reveals how much work remains ahead. From the far side of the river, the road continues across open countryside toward a distant Roman settlement, and for a short time the landscape seems almost merciful. There are no towering forests and no enormous mountains waiting immediately in front of you. Only long fields of grass, scattered trees, and gentle slopes disappearing toward the horizon. But the engineers know something the workers have not yet seen. The land ahead contains countless smaller obstacles that must each be dealt with before the road can continue. A Roman road may appear perfectly straight from a distance, yet maintaining that straightness requires constant adjustment. A small hill must be cut down. A depression must be filled. A stream must be redirected. A field must be measured and marked. A drainage channel must be dug beside the road so winter rain does not turn the surface into mud. Every few hundred steps, another problem appears. By now you have become accustomed to the rhythm of construction, but the monotony is beginning to affect you in ways that physical pain cannot explain. At the beginning of the project, every completed section felt like an achievement. Now you sometimes look at a finished stretch and feel almost nothing. It is simply another part of the road, another section that allows the engineers to point farther ahead and say, "There." The destination always moves forward. The road seems to have no end. You wake before dawn, work until sunset, eat, sleep, and repeat. The seasons change around you while the construction continues. Your beard grows longer. Your sandals become worn through. Your clothes have been repaired so many times that you barely remember their original appearance. The hands of the workers look increasingly similar, all marked by cuts, scars, thickened skin, and swollen joints. Yet the road continues to demand more. One morning, the engineers announced that the next section must be completed before the arrival of a military convoy. The road is needed to transport soldiers and supplies toward a distant frontier, and the deadline is suddenly much shorter than expected. The workers are ordered to increase their pace. Teams are reorganized. More carts arrive from nearby quarries. Additional laborers are brought in from surrounding settlements. The construction site becomes louder and more chaotic than ever before. Oxen pull enormous loads of stone while men shout directions to keep the carts from colliding. Workers carrying baskets move constantly between excavation pits and the roadbed. Engineers inspect measurements while military officers arrive to make sure the project is progressing quickly enough. You are assigned to the road's upper foundation, where large stones must be arranged tightly enough to withstand the weight of military wagons. The work requires constant bending, lifting, and positioning. A stone that looks manageable from a distance becomes painfully heavy when you try to move it by hand. Several men work together, using wooden levers to rotate each block into place. Sometimes the stone moves exactly as expected. Sometimes it slips and crushes the edge of another stone, forcing everyone to begin again. The pressure of the deadline makes mistakes more common. People become impatient. Voices grow louder. The overseers shout more frequently. Even small delays can lead to arguments. One afternoon, a worker accidentally breaks a wooden handle while trying to loosen a stone. He stares at the broken tool for several seconds, knowing that replacing it will take time. The overseer begins shouting, but another worker quietly hands him a spare handle. The situation ends without a fight. Everyone understands that the road has already taken enough from them. There is no need to make the day worse. As the military deadline approaches, the workers begin seeing the first signs of the approaching convoy. Dust rises along a distant road. Scouts arrive on horseback, followed by carts carrying supplies and equipment. The army is not yet at the construction site, but its presence changes everything. Roman soldiers are used to roads being ready when commanders require them. They do not care how difficult the construction has been. They care that the road can carry their equipment. For the workers, this creates enormous pressure. The foundation must be strong. The surface must be level. The drainage must function. The bridge must support heavy loads. Nothing can be allowed to fail when the soldiers arrive. You work longer hours than ever before. Even after sunset, some sections continue under the light of oil lamps. The glow of dozens of small fires and lamps stretches across the construction site, making the unfinished road look like a glowing line disappearing into the darkness. You carry stones until your arms feel numb. When you finally stop, your hands remain clenched as though they are still holding the weight. One night, after everyone has gone quiet, you walk alone along the completed section. The stars above are bright, and the road beneath your feet looks almost beautiful in the moonlight. During the day, you see only dirt, sweat, and broken stones. At night, without the noise of workers, you can finally see what all that labor has created. The road appears perfectly straight, stretching toward the horizon as if someone drew a line across the earth. You stop beside a milestone recently placed by the engineers. Its inscription records the distance to the nearest settlement and honors the authority responsible for the road. Your name is not there. None of the workers' names are there. The stone speaks of officials and imperial power, not the men who carried the stones. You touch its cold surface and wonder how many people will eventually pass it. Perhaps thousands, perhaps millions. They will read the names carved into the stone and continue walking without ever wondering who built the road beneath it. The next morning, the military convoy arrives. Hundreds of soldiers march toward the construction site in disciplined formation, their armor reflecting the morning sun. Behind them come carts loaded with grain, weapons, tents, tools, and other supplies. Horses pull heavy wagons while officers ride alongside them. For a few moments, everyone on the construction site stops working and watches. The road that seems so endless suddenly has a purpose standing directly in front of you. The first soldiers step onto the newly completed surface. Their sandals strike the stones in a steady rhythm. The wagons follow. You watch carefully as the first heavy cart crosses the section you helped build. The wheels roll smoothly. The foundation holds. Nothing collapses. Nothing shifts. The bridge supports the weight. The road works. It is a small moment, but for you it feels enormous. Weeks of exhaustion have finally produced something that can be tested by the very people who demanded it. The convoy continues toward the horizon, and within minutes the soldiers disappear into the distance. The road becomes quiet again. The workers return to their tools. There is no celebration, no official thanks, no reward. The military convoy simply continues toward its destination, and the construction crew is ordered to begin the next section. You almost laugh at the absurdity of it. You have just watched an entire army cross the road, yet before the dust has settled, the overseer is already shouting for more stones. The road has proven itself, and therefore it must continue. That afternoon, you begin work again. The next section requires a long drainage system because the land ahead receives heavy seasonal rainfall. You dig narrow channels beside the road, shaping them so water will flow away from the foundation rather than beneath it. The work is less dramatic than bridge construction or mountain cutting, but you learn that drainage may be one of the most important tasks of all. Water is the enemy that never announces. The seventh stage begins under a sky that has remained gray for several days. And by now, the workers have learned to recognize the warning signs of a long season of rain. The ground beside the road has become soft. The drainage channels are filled with brown water, and every cart leaves deep tracks that remain visible long after it has passed. The engineers are worried because the next section of the road crosses a wide plain where there is almost no natural elevation to keep water away from the foundation. If the road is built too low, the entire surface could become a muddy channel during the winter. If it is raised too high, enormous quantities of soil and stone will have to be transported from distant areas. Once again, the decision is made from a map, but the consequences will be carried by the workers. The road must be raised. You and hundreds of other men are ordered to create a long artificial embankment stretching across the plain, and the scale of the task is difficult to understand even after the first day begins. Earth must be dug from nearby pits, placed into baskets, carried to the road, spread in layers, and compacted before another layer can be added. The process is slow and repetitive, but the engineers insist that every layer must be carefully prepared. A road that looks solid from the outside can still fail if the material beneath it has not been compressed properly. So the workers spend weeks building something that most travelers will never even see. Every morning begins in darkness. You wake to the sound of tools being moved outside the shelters and the quiet voices of men preparing breakfast. The fire is often difficult to keep alive because the wood has become damp from constant rain. You eat quickly and walk toward the excavation pit while mist still covers the plain. By the time the sun appears, you are already sweating beneath your rough clothing. The first baskets of earth are filled. You lift one onto your shoulder and begin walking toward the road. The distance is not particularly far, but after several hours, the same journey begins to feel endless. 10 steps, 20 steps, 50. Empty the basket. Return. Fill it again. Repeat. You stop counting after a while. The workers develop their own rhythm because without one, the work becomes unbearable. Some men sing quietly while they carry the loads. Others tell stories. A few walk in complete silence. Nobody has the energy for constant conversation. One older laborer begins telling you about a road he helped build many years earlier in another province. He says the road took nearly 5 years to complete and crossed mountains that seemed impossible to conquer. He tells you that when the project finally ended, he traveled back along the same route and realized that the road looked as though it had always existed. The thought stays with you. Perhaps that is the true goal of Roman road building. The finished road should erase the memory of its own construction. It should look natural, permanent, inevitable. Nobody should look at it and imagine hundreds of men carrying baskets beneath the sun. Nobody should see the scars, injuries, arguments, exhaustion, or years of labor hidden beneath the stones. The road should simply appear. By midday, the rain begins again. At first, it is light enough to ignore, but within an hour, the plain is covered by a steady curtain of water. The excavation pit starts filling rapidly. Mud sticks to the workers' sandals and makes the baskets heavier. The overseers shout for everyone to continue, but the pace slows naturally. Every step becomes dangerous. One worker slips while carrying a full basket and falls forward, spilling the earth across the ground. Another man helps him stand. The overseer shouts angrily, but the worker says nothing. He simply fills the basket again. You begin to wonder how many times a man can fall before he stops getting back up. The answer seems to be as many times as necessary. The road must continue. In the afternoon, the engineers discover that the rain has exposed a serious problem. One of the drainage channels has been constructed at the wrong angle, causing water to flow directly toward the foundation rather than away from it. The mistake means several days of work must be removed and rebuilt. The workers are furious. You have spent hours carrying stones and digging channels, and now you are ordered to destroy part of what you built. The engineer explains that if the mistake remains, the road could fail during the next major storm. Nobody argues after hearing that. A bad drainage channel is not simply an inconvenience. Could destroy months of work. So the workers return to their tools. The damaged section is opened, the stones are removed, and the channel is rebuilt at a sharper angle. By evening, everyone is covered in mud. You return to camp barely able to lift your arms. Yet there is something satisfying about seeing the water finally flow correctly through the repaired channel. It rushes away from the road and disappears into a lower section of the plain. The engineer watches it carefully before giving a small nod. It is one of the few signs of approval the workers receive. The following weeks bring more rain and more difficult conditions. The plain becomes almost impossible to cross without temporary wooden walkways. Workers build narrow paths from timber so carts can transport stones without becoming trapped in the mud. Oxen struggle constantly. Several animals become exhausted and collapse beneath their harnesses. Their drivers attempt to encourage them, but sometimes there is nothing they can do. The road consumes animals as well as men. Every cart that breaks down creates another problem because its load still needs to reach the construction site. When one of the large supply carts loses a wheel, the workers are forced to unload the stones by hand, repair the axle, and reload everything. An entire afternoon disappears because of one broken piece of wood. You begin to realize that road construction is filled with delays that no engineer can predict. A broken wheel, a sick ox, fallen tree, a sudden storm, a landslide, a damaged tool, a worker injured, a river rising. Every small event pushes the schedule further away. Yet the road continues because the workers absorb those delays with longer hours. One evening, after weeks of rain, the clouds finally clear. The sunset turns the wet plain orange, and for the first time in many days the workers can see the entire construction site clearly. The raised roadbed stretches across the landscape like an enormous artificial ridge. From a distance, it almost looks finished. You stand at the highest point and watch the last light disappear behind the hills. In the distance, the Roman settlement that the road will eventually reach can be seen as a small collection of rooftops. For months, that settlement has seemed impossibly far away. Now it looks close enough to touch. You imagine the day when the road reaches it. Merchants will arrive with carts full of goods. Soldiers will march through the gates. Travelers will stop at inns. Farmers will bring produce to market. The settlement will become connected to the wider empire because of the stones beneath your feet. Yet you know the road will not simply end there. Once one destination is connected, another will become important. The network will continue growing. That is how Rome expands without moving its borders. Roads carry its orders, its soldiers, its taxes, its merchants, and its culture farther than any individual person could travel. You are one small part of that enormous system, and yet without thousands of people like you, the system would not function. As the final weeks of the 7th stage approach, the embankment is finally high enough to protect the future road from seasonal flooding. The workers begin placing the upper layers of smaller stones and gravel. The surface becomes smoother with every passing day. Teams of men use wooden mallets to compact the material while others check the slope with simple measuring tools. The work is slower now because precision matters more than speed. One uneven section can cause water to collect. One weak area can collapse beneath a wagon. The 8th stage begins as the road finally leaves the endless plain and approaches the first large settlement along the route. But instead of bringing an end to the workers' misery, the arrival of civilization creates an entirely new set of problems. For months you have lived among forests, hills, rivers, mud, and temporary camps, where the only people you regularly see are other laborers, engineers, soldiers, and quarry workers. Now the distant rooftops of the settlement grow larger every day, and with them comes noise, traffic, merchants, animals, curious travelers, and officials who have suddenly become very interested in the condition of the road. The engineers are told that the new route must connect directly with the settlement's main gate, and that means the final approach cannot simply stop at the edge of town. It must be carefully aligned with existing streets, drainage channels, buildings, fields, and older paths. You had imagined that reaching the town would mean easier work. Instead, it means precision. Every stone must be placed correctly because there are now people watching. The road can no longer be built wherever the workers find convenient ground. It must fit into the life of the settlement itself. The first morning near the town feels strangely different. Before sunrise, you can hear dogs barking somewhere beyond the fields. Smoke rises from distant rooftops, and the smell of bread and cooking fires reaches the construction camp. For the first time in months, you wake knowing that somewhere nearby there are people living ordinary lives while you prepare to spend another day lifting stones. The contrast is uncomfortable. You see farmers walking toward their fields, merchants opening small stalls, children following their parents along the roads, and travelers arriving with carts. Their lives continue as though the construction project does not exist. Yet everyone will eventually use what you are building. The engineers spend the morning marking the route through the outskirts of the settlement. They use ropes, stakes, and measuring rods to create a perfectly controlled line. Several older roads must be removed because they do not match the new alignment. Fences are dismantled. Small sections of farmland are cut away. Drainage ditches are moved. A few simple structures standing too close to the planned road are ordered to be demolished. The workers receive the task of clearing them. You help remove a small wooden building that had apparently served as a storage shed for a local farmer. The owner watches silently from nearby while the workers pull apart the structure. He is not happy. The road may benefit the settlement, but for him it means losing part of his land. You begin to understand that Roman roads do not simply connect places. They reshape them. Wherever the road passes, boundaries change, businesses appear, travelers arrive, and old paths disappear. The empire's infrastructure brings opportunity to some people and inconvenience to others. Yet once the imperial order has been given, the decision is rarely questioned by those responsible for construction. The road must pass here. Therefore, everything in its path must move. By midday, the workers begin excavating the final approach. Unlike the remote sections, this area contains layers of old human activity. Broken pottery, pieces of wood, old stones, and fragments of earlier roads appear beneath the soil. The engineers stop frequently to examine what they find. You are told to continue carefully because the ground must be preserved enough for the new foundation. It feels strange to dig through the remains of roads built by people who lived here before you. You wonder whether those workers also complained about aching backs and broken tools. Perhaps they stood in the same place centuries earlier, building a road for another ruler, another army, another generation of travelers. The thought makes the work feel strangely repetitive, as though road builders across history are trapped in the same cycle of stone and earth. The new road begins rising above the old ground. Large foundation stones are placed first, followed by smaller fragments and gravel. The workers compact each layer carefully. At the edges, drainage channels are constructed to protect nearby houses from water flowing off the road. This becomes particularly important because the road is now higher than some of the surrounding land. Without proper drainage, rainwater could flood gardens, workshops, and homes. You spend several days digging these channels while local residents watch from their doorways. Some complain about the noise. Others ask when the road will be finished. A few merchants seem excited because they expect more travelers to pass through the town once the road opens. You hear one innkeeper talking enthusiastically about new customers. Another merchant says he will be able to send goods to distant markets much faster. Listening to them, you realize that the road is already changing people's expectations even though it is unfinished. Everyone is imagining the future benefits while you are still carrying the stones required to create it. One afternoon, a group of Roman officials arrives to inspect the project. Unlike the engineers, they are dressed cleanly and carry themselves with the confidence of men who have spent most of their lives giving orders rather than following them. They walk along the construction site without getting their sandals dirty, examining the width of the road and discussing the quality of the stone. One official points toward a section that appears slightly uneven and demands that it be rebuilt. You stare at the section. You know exactly how much work went into it. Hundreds of stones were placed there over several days. The official does not know that. He only sees an imperfection. The workers are ordered to remove the upper layer and rebuild it. Nobody argues. The official continues walking. After he leaves, one of the older workers mutters that a man who has never lifted a stone should not be allowed to judge one. A few workers laugh quietly. It is one of the rare moments of humor during a difficult day. Still, the section must be rebuilt. The road must look perfect. As construction reaches the town gate, another problem appears. The entrance is too narrow for the planned traffic. The existing gate structure will have to be modified. Engineers measure the opening repeatedly, while soldiers stand nearby to control the growing crowd of curious residents. The workers begin dismantling part of the old structure and preparing a wider entrance. The task is dangerous because the gate is made of heavy stone blocks that have supported each other for years. Removing one incorrectly could cause a collapse. Wooden supports are constructed beneath the upper sections before workers carefully remove the stones one by one. You spend several days helping with this work, always aware that a single mistake could bring a wall down on everyone beneath it. The tension is constant. Every block must be lifted slowly. Every rope must be checked. Every support must remain secure. Finally, the opening is widened enough for the new road to pass directly through. The first carts are tested. They move through the gate without touching the sides. The engineers are satisfied. The workers are not given time to celebrate because the surface still needs finishing. The final paving stones arrive from the quarry in enormous carts. These are the stones that travelers will actually see. Unlike the rough foundation beneath them, they must be shaped, fitted, and positioned carefully. Each stone has to sit firmly beside the next so wheels do not catch between gaps. Workers use heavy wooden mallets to settle them into place. You spend hours kneeling on the ground, adjusting stones with your hands while dust covers your knees and clothing. Slowly, the rough construction site begins transforming into a proper Roman road. The surface becomes smoother and more organized. The edges become straight. The drainage channels run neatly beside it. Milestones are placed at measured intervals. The road now looks almost complete. Yet the closer it gets to completion, the more emotional the workers become. For months, the road has been the center of their lives. It has been the reason they woke before sunrise, the reason begins after the road has finally entered the settlement. But instead of receiving the rest the workers have been expecting, you are given a new assignment farther beyond the town where the route must continue toward a distant military frontier. The completed section behind you is already filled with travelers, carts, soldiers, animals, and merchants, yet you are standing at its edge with the same worn tools you carried months ago, watching engineers place new stakes into untouched ground. For a brief moment you wonder whether the road will ever truly end. Every time one section is completed, another begins beyond it. The empire seems to stretch farther than any person can imagine, and its roads are expected to follow that endless expansion. This time the route passes through a region where the land is drier and more exposed. with long stretches of rocky ground broken by low hills and scattered vegetation. There is less forest to clear, but the heat becomes a new enemy. By sunrise, the air is already warm, and by midday, the stones become so hot that touching them with bare hands is painful. The workers begin covering their heads with pieces of cloth and carrying small amounts of water whenever possible, but the water supply is never generous. Every drop must be transported from nearby wells or streams, and the construction camp grows increasingly dependent on supply carts. The first few days are spent surveying the terrain. The engineers want the road to remain as straight as possible, but the landscape contains several areas of exposed rock that cannot easily be removed. Instead of abandoning the route, the workers are ordered to cut directly through the stone. You begin another long period of hammering and chiseling, standing beneath the burning sun while iron tools strike rock over and over again. Unlike the soft earth of the plains, the stone barely changes after dozens of blows. You strike it again, again, again. Tiny fragments break away and fall at your feet. By the end of the day, the workers have created only a shallow groove. The next morning, they return to the same place and continue. The monotony becomes almost unbearable because there is so little visible progress. Yet slowly, almost imperceptibly, the groove becomes deeper. Days later, it becomes a trench. Weeks later, it becomes a passage wide enough for the road. You begin to understand that some of the greatest Roman roads are created not through dramatic moments, but through the accumulation of thousands of small movements that eventually become something enormous. During the hottest part of the day, the workers are ordered to stop briefly and seek shade wherever they can find it. Some shelter beneath temporary wooden structures while others sit beside carts. The break is short because the road cannot afford long pauses. You drink warm water and eat a piece of bread that has become hard from the heat. A nearby worker jokes that the bread is almost as difficult to break as the stone. Everyone laughs quietly. Humor has become one of the few ways the workers can survive the endless repetition. After the short break, the hammers begin again. One afternoon, the chief engineer arrives with an unusual instruction. A section of the road must be raised several feet above the surrounding land because the engineers have discovered that heavy seasonal storms can turn the lower ground into a temporary lake. The workers stare at the open landscape and wonder where all the material will come from. The answer is simple: the nearby hill. Once again, earth and stone must be moved from one place to another. You are assigned to the excavation team. Large baskets are filled with earth and carried up the growing roadbed. The heat makes every journey exhausting. The workers form long lines to reduce the distance each person has to travel, but even with this system, the work is brutal. Your shoulders become raw beneath the basket straps. Sweat soaks through your clothing. Dust sticks to your skin. The air smells of dry earth and sweat. By sunset, the roadbed has risen only slightly. Yet the next day you will continue, and the day after that. One morning, a supply cart arrives carrying fresh tools from a distant town. The workers gather around it immediately because several of their old picks have become damaged beyond repair. You receive a new wooden-handled tool and hold it carefully, almost appreciating it as though it were something valuable. Tools are not possessions you take for granted anymore. A good axe, a strong shovel, or a sharp chisel can determine how miserable a day becomes. A broken handle can turn an already difficult task into hours of frustration. The new tools make the work slightly easier, and for several days progress improves. The roadbed begins taking shape across the rocky terrain, and the first foundation stones are delivered. But then a sudden storm arrives. The sky darkens in the middle of the afternoon, and strong winds sweep across the construction site. The workers quickly cover piles of gravel and secure loose tools. Rain begins falling heavily, and within minutes the dry ground becomes slick mud. The engineers order everyone away from the highest sections because they fear erosion. The storm lasts for hours. When it finally ends, the workers return to find that a large portion of the newly constructed embankment has collapsed. Water has cut deep channels through the earth, carrying gravel and smaller stones downhill. You stand in silence looking at the damage. Weeks of labor have been partially erased in one afternoon. Nobody wants to begin again, yet everyone knows they must. The following morning, the workers return to the damaged section. There is no anger left, only exhaustion. The fallen material is collected, the drainage system is redesigned, and stronger retaining stones are added along the sides. The engineers learn from the storm, and the road becomes stronger because of it. This is another lesson that the workers slowly understand. The road is never finished simply because the stones have been placed. It must survive the landscape. Every storm, flood, cart, horse, and soldier will test it. A road is not merely something you build. It is something you constantly have to convince the earth to accept. As the weeks pass, the route begins approaching another small settlement. Unlike the larger town behind you, this place is little more than a cluster of houses, farms, workshops, and a small roadside market. Yet the arrival of the road is already changing the area. Local people have begun clearing land beside the route in anticipation of travelers. A farmer has built a simple shelter where merchants can stop. Someone else has opened a small food stall. The workers notice that every place connected to the road begins to change almost immediately. The road brings movement, and movement brings money. Even before the final stones are placed, people are preparing for the travelers who will come. One evening, you visit the settlement with several other workers to purchase supplies. It feels strange to walk among ordinary people again. For months, your world has been the construction camp. Now you hear conversations about harvests, prices, families, and local disputes. Nobody seems particularly interested in the road builders sitting nearby. To them, you are simply workers passing through. You realize that this is how most of the empire sees people like you, invisible until the road is finished. Once the road opens, the workers disappear from people's thoughts and the road becomes the important thing. On the way back to camp, you walk along the newly completed section under the stars. A Roman courier passes you at high speed, his horse's hooves striking the stones in a steady rhythm. The rider does not slow down. He is carrying an official message toward the frontier. You watch him disappear into the darkness and think about how quickly he is traveling compared with the months it took to create the road beneath him. He will probably reach his destination within days. You spent months making those days possible. The thought does not make you angry anymore. Instead, it gives you a strange sense of importance. Your work is invisible precisely because it works. If the begins with the road builders finally seeing the distant frontier, but the sight brings less relief than expected because the last stretch is also the most demanding. Beyond the low hills ahead lies the Roman military territory, marked by watchtowers, wooden palisades, distant camps, and the occasional movement of soldiers along the horizon. The road is supposed to reach the main fort, connecting the frontier directly with the settlements and supply routes far behind you. Everyone in the construction camp knows that once this section is completed, the main project will finally be finished. After months of forests, rivers, hills, mud, storms, heat, injuries, broken tools, and endless baskets of earth, there is finally a destination. Yet the engineers warn everyone not to become careless. The final section crosses rough ground and must rise gradually toward the fort, meaning the road needs another carefully constructed embankment. The workers begin before sunrise as usual, but the mood is different. Men talk more than they normally do, imagining what they will do when the work ends. Some speak about returning to their families. Others want to find employment in the nearby settlement. A few have already been promised positions on another Roman construction project. You listen quietly because you are not sure what you will do. After so many months, the road has become the structure around which your entire life revolves. It is strange to imagine waking up somewhere without seeing piles of stone waiting beside your shelter. The first task is clearing a final section of rough vegetation. There are fewer trees here, but the ground is covered with thorny bushes and dense roots. Workers use axes and knives to clear the route while others dig out the roots. The wind carries the smell of the frontier camp, mixed with smoke from military cooking fires. Occasionally you can hear distant horns from the fort. The sound reminds everyone that the road is being built for a purpose larger than transportation. Soldiers need supplies. Orders need to move. Reinforcements need to arrive quickly. The frontier cannot be connected to the rest of Rome without a reliable route. Once the vegetation is removed, the workers begin excavating the roadbed. The soil is surprisingly rocky, forcing everyone to use picks and hammers. The first hours pass slowly. You strike stone after stone while the engineers measure the depth of the excavation. They insist that the foundation must be deeper than expected because the road will carry heavy military wagons. The workers complain quietly, but nobody is surprised anymore. Every time you think you understand how difficult a section will be, the road finds a way to become harder. By midday, the sun is high above the frontier and the wind has become stronger. Dust blows across the construction site, covering the workers and turning the air hazy. You wrap a cloth around your face and continue digging. The men around you look exhausted, but there is also a strange energy among them. The end is close. That knowledge makes the final hours easier. Every basket carried toward the road feels like one less basket that will ever need to be carried. Every stone placed feels like another part of your life being completed. The foundation begins to rise as large stones are brought from the quarry. Unlike earlier sections, the supply carts now arrive more frequently because the nearby military settlement has been ordered to assist with the project. Soldiers occasionally help with moving the heaviest stones, creating a strange scene in which men who normally carry weapons are suddenly pulling ropes beside exhausted laborers. The soldiers are stronger and accustomed to discipline, but even they struggle with the largest blocks. Together, everyone works in silence until the stone finally moves. You realize that the road has created an unusual connection between people who normally occupy completely different worlds. Soldiers, engineers, slaves, local workers, merchants, and laborers all depend on the same road, even if their lives could not be more different. The road becomes the place where their worlds meet. By afternoon, the first upper layers are being placed. Smaller stones and gravel fill the foundation, creating a surface strong enough to support the final paving. Workers use heavy wooden mallets to compact the material while engineers constantly check the slope. The road must climb gradually toward the fort, and even a small error could make the final approach too steep. You spend hours moving along the edge of the road, carrying stones and fitting them into gaps. Your body moves almost automatically now. Lift, carry, place, adjust, compact, repeat. You have performed these actions so many times that you no longer need to think about them. Yet this time every movement feels different because you know it is almost over. Late in the afternoon, a group of soldiers arrives from the fort to inspect the progress. Their commander walks beside the engineers and examines the road carefully. He asks whether the bridge farther back can support supply wagons carrying heavy equipment. The engineers assure him that it can. He asks whether the drainage channels are large enough for winter storms. Again, they answer yes. He asks when the road will be ready for military use. The engineer looks toward the workers and says, "Soon." You hear the word and feel something inside you change. Soon. For months, the road has always been something that would be finished eventually. Now there is finally a specific ending. The commander leaves, and the workers return to their tasks with renewed energy. The final paving stones arrive just before sunset. They are carefully shaped blocks intended to create the visible surface of the road. Everyone knows these are the stones that future travelers will remember, even though they represent only a small part of the work. The first stones are laid at the beginning of the final section. You kneel beside them and help position each one. The stones must fit tightly together, their edges aligned so that cartwheels can pass smoothly. Workers use mallets to settle them into place. Slowly, the road begins to look finished. The surface becomes pale and solid against the darker earth surrounding it. As darkness falls, oil lamps are placed along the construction site because nobody wants to stop. The final stretch must be completed as quickly as possible. You continue working beneath the flickering light, surrounded by dozens of men doing the same thing. The night air is cold, and your muscles are exhausted, but nobody complains. For perhaps the first time, the workers are united by something other than necessity. Everyone wants to see the road finished. Near midnight, the last major section is almost complete. You step backward and look along the route. The road stretches behind you for miles, disappearing into the darkness toward the distant towns and bridges you helped build. Ahead, the fort's lights flicker against the horizon. The entire journey seems to exist in one long line beneath your feet. You remember the first tree you cut down. You remember the muddy valley. You remember the river that destroyed the temporary bridge. You remember the hillside where stones nearly buried a worker. You remember the endless plain, the storms, the broken carts, the heat, the cold, the injured men, and the nights when your body was too tired to move. All of it is connected now. The road is the physical record of those experiences, even though none of them are written down. Just before dawn, the final paving stone is lowered into place. The workers stand around it in silence. The engineer checks the alignment one last time. He walks several steps along the finished surface, bends down, examines one section, and finally gives a small nod. The road is complete. For a moment, nobody moves. After months of commands, measurements, shouting, lifting, digging, and hammering, there is suddenly nothing left to do. The silence feels almost uncomfortable. Then someone begins laughing. Another worker. Part 11 begins after the road has officially opened. But for you, the story is not quite finished. The engineers have left most of the construction site, the military has begun using the route, and merchants are already moving their carts across the stones. Yet a small group of workers has been ordered to remain behind for repairs and final inspections. You are among them. It feels almost cruel to have reached the end only to discover that the road still demands your attention. For months you imagined the day when the final stone would be placed and everyone could simply walk away. But Roman roads are not considered complete merely because they can be traveled. The first weeks after opening are when the engineers discover whether their work will actually survive. Heavy wagons expose weak sections. Rain reveals poor drainage. Horses damage the edges. Wheels loosen stones. Water finds cracks that were invisible during construction. The road must be watched, tested, and repaired before the workers are finally dismissed. The first morning after the official opening, you stand beside the road and watch the first large military convoy pass. The soldiers move with discipline, their equipment packed onto heavy carts pulled by oxen and horses. The road handles the weight, but you notice something that makes you uneasy. One section near a drainage channel has settled slightly beneath the wheels of a wagon. It is not yet dangerous, but the engineer sees it immediately. He orders the wagon stopped and points toward the depression. The workers sigh. Another repair. Another section of stone must be removed. You kneel beside the road and begin lifting the paving blocks that you once helped place. Beneath them, the foundation has shifted because water entered through a small gap. The engineer explains that if the problem is ignored, the depression will grow larger every time a wagon passes. Within a few months, the road could become badly damaged. So you remove the weak material, add more stone, compact the foundation, and replace the paving blocks. It takes most of the morning to repair something that looks insignificant to anyone passing by. A merchant eventually approaches while you are working and asks why the road is blocked. You tell him that it is being repaired. He complains about the delay. You almost laugh. He has no idea how many months of labor stand behind the stones he is impatiently waiting to cross. Yet you understand his frustration because the road is now part of everyday life. Once people begin depending on it, even a short closure becomes an inconvenience. That is perhaps the greatest sign that the project succeeded. The road has become necessary. During the following days, more problems appear. One of the smaller drainage channels becomes clogged with branches and leaves after a storm. Water begins collecting beside the road. The workers clear the channel and reinforce its walls with additional stones. Another section near the town gate develops loose paving because carts repeatedly turn in the same place. You replace the damaged stones and strengthen the foundation underneath. Every repair reminds you of something the original construction never made obvious. The road is alive in a strange way. It changes every day beneath the pressure of the people who use it. The empire moves across it, and the road absorbs the consequences. One afternoon, a group of young soldiers stops near you while you are repairing the edge. They ask whether you were one of the men who built the road. You tell them that you were. One soldier looks down at the stones and then back at you. He says that the road will make their journey toward the frontier much easier. Another soldier jokes that he hopes the road is strong enough to survive their commander's supply wagons. You smile. For once, someone has asked. You explain that the road took many months to construct and that hundreds of workers were involved. The soldiers seem surprised. To them, the road had simply appeared. They had marched along similar roads across other provinces their entire lives. They had never stopped to wonder how they were made. One soldier places his hand on a paving stone and says quietly that he will remember the men who built it. You know he probably will not remember your name, but the gesture still matters. The workers have become accustomed to being invisible, so even a moment of recognition feels unusual. Later that evening, you sit beside the fire with several older workers and talk about the road. Some are already planning to leave. One man says he wants to return to his village. Another has heard about a bridge construction project farther south and intends to join it. A third simply wants to find a place where he can work with less supervision. Everyone understands that the empire will continue building. There will always be another road, another bridge, another wall, another quarry. For men like you, the end of one project often means the beginning of another. You begin wondering whether you have truly finished building roads or whether this is simply the end of one chapter. The next morning, the engineers receive an official message informing them that the road has been approved for permanent use. The news is delivered without ceremony. A messenger arrives, hands the document to the chief engineer, and leaves. The engineer reads it, nods, and tells the workers that the road is officially complete. Some men cheer, others laugh. A few simply sit down because they have been waiting so long that they no longer know how to react. You look down the road toward the distant horizon. The surface is clean and bright beneath the morning light. Carts move across it. Horses kick dust along the edges. Soldiers walk in groups. Merchants call to one another. The road has become part of the world. The construction camp, however, is already beginning to disappear. Shelters are dismantled. Temporary fences are removed. And used timber is gathered. Tools are packed into carts. The fire pits that once burned every night are slowly abandoned. What took months to create can be dismantled in a few days. The camp leaves almost no trace. You find this strangely sad. The road will remain, but the place where the workers lived will vanish. Someone walking here a year from now may have no idea that hundreds of people once slept beside the road beneath crude shelters. They will see only grass growing over the ground. The road will look permanent. The workers will look temporary. On the final evening, you walk alone along the route. The sun is setting behind the hills, turning the paving stones warm beneath the fading light. You pass the bridge you helped construct. Below it, the river moves quietly, completely indifferent to the months of struggle that took place above its water. You continue toward the valley and remember the first time you saw it. At that time, it seemed impossible to cross. Now carts move across the bridge as though it had always been there. You continue farther and reach the hillside cut. The scars left by your tools are no longer obvious. Rain has already softened the edges. Grass has begun growing beside the road. The landscape is slowly accepting what you built. You walk farther until you reach the plain. The raised embankment stretches into the distance, and drainage channels carry small streams of water away from the road. You remember carrying baskets across this place under endless rain. You remember falling, slipping, and repairing the same section again and again. Now the road is quiet and solid. You realize that the landscape no longer looks like a construction site. It looks like a road. That transformation feels almost unreal. You stop beside a milestone and sit on the ground. The stone carries the names and titles of officials responsible for the project. You read the inscription slowly. None of the workers are mentioned. You are not surprised. History has always preferred the names of emperors, generals, governors, and engineers. Ordinary laborers disappear. Their achievements become anonymous structures. Yet sitting there, you understand that anonymity does not make the work meaningless. The road exists whether your name is written on it or not. Perhaps begins with the final morning beside the completed Roman road. And for the first time since the project began, you wake before the sun without hearing the sound of hammers, axes, shovels, or men shouting instructions across the camp. The silence feels unfamiliar. You lie still for several moments, almost expecting someone to order you outside, but no voice comes. The construction is finished. The road is finished. The camp is finished. You dress slowly, collect the few belongings that remain, and step outside into the cold morning air. The temporary shelters that once held hundreds of workers are almost completely gone. Only a few wooden structures remain, and even those will disappear before the day is over. The ground is covered with footprints, fragments of timber, broken stones, old ropes, pieces of pottery, and the small remains of a life that existed here for months. Soon the grass will grow over all of it. You look toward the road. It is already alive. A merchant's cart moves toward the settlement. A group of soldiers marches toward the frontier. A courier rides quickly in the opposite direction. A farmer leads an ox beside the road. People are using the route without thinking about who built it. The road has already become ordinary. You stand there watching the traffic and realize that this is how the project was always meant to end. The workers disappear. The road remains. After breakfast, the remaining men gather for the final inspection of the camp. Tools are collected and loaded onto carts. Anything useful is taken to the next construction project. Broken equipment is left behind. The fire pits are filled. The temporary storage areas are dismantled. You walk through the camp one final time, remembering how different it looked when you first arrived. At that time, there was nothing here except open land and a few survey stakes. Now the landscape has been transformed by months of labor. Yet the camp itself will vanish almost completely. The road, however, will remain. That contrast stays in your mind as you prepare to leave. You decide to walk the route one last time before departing. You begin at the frontier and follow the stones back toward the settlement. The morning is cool, and the road feels firm beneath your feet. You pass the first milestone and remember the day it was placed. You had been exhausted and barely noticed the inscription. Now you stop and read it carefully. It records the authority of Rome, the officials responsible for the project, and the distance to the next destination. It does not mention you. It does not mention the hundreds of workers who built the road. You continue walking. A military convoy passes you, heading toward the frontier. The soldiers are quiet. Their carts move smoothly across the surface. You step aside and watch them disappear. You remember the first time you saw a military convoy use the road during construction. At that time, you were terrified that the surface would fail. Now you barely notice the wheels. The road works. That is enough. Farther ahead, you reach the wide plain. The raised embankment looks different in the morning light. Grass has already begun growing beside the edges. Water moves through the drainage channels exactly as the engineers intended. You remember the endless rain and the days spent carrying baskets of earth. You remember how impossible the work felt. Yet now the embankment looks natural, almost as though the landscape itself had always been shaped this way. You stop for a moment and look across the plain. Somewhere beneath the surface are the foundations you helped build. Nobody can see them. Nobody needs to. They are doing their job. You continue toward the rocky section where the workers spent weeks cutting through stone. The marks left by the hammers are still visible in places. You run your fingers over the rough surface and remember the sound of iron striking rock day after day. You remember how little progress seemed to be made. At the time, the work felt pointless. Now the road passes through the rock as though the stone had always been meant to open there. You realize that this is what time does to difficult work. Turns struggle into scenery. What once exhausted you becomes invisible to everyone who comes afterward. You continue until you reach the bridge. The river is calm today. Sunlight reflects across the water, and birds move along the banks. You stop on the bridge and look down. You remember standing waist deep in the river during the earliest stages of construction, freezing beneath the morning sky while trying to secure foundations. You remember the flood that destroyed the temporary structures. You remember rebuilding everything while exhausted. Now the bridge stands quietly above the same river. Travelers cross without hesitation. The water flows beneath them as if nothing unusual ever happened. You lean against the stone wall and watch a wagon pass. The driver barely looks at the bridge. To him, it is simply part of the road. That is when you finally understand something you could not understand during construction. The greatest achievement of a road builder is to make something extraordinary appear ordinary. The bridge should not frighten travelers. The road should not impress them every morning. The drainage should not be noticed. The foundations should remain hidden. The road must simply work. You continue walking until you reach the valley where the first major section of the project began. The forest that once blocked your route has been cleared. New growth has already begun appearing around the edges. The road cuts through the landscape in a straight line. You remember the first tree you cut down. You remember the sound it made when it finally fell. At the time, that tree represented the beginning of an enormous task. Now it is difficult to remember exactly where it stood. You stop and look around, trying to find some trace of the old landscape. There is almost nothing. The road has changed everything. It has created a permanent line through the countryside. Travelers will follow it for generations. Perhaps farms will appear beside it. Perhaps inns will be built. Perhaps a village will grow where the workers once camped. The road may create settlements that do not yet exist. That thought makes you realize how much larger the project is than the workers who built it. A road is never just a road. It changes everything around it. It determines where people travel, where they stop, where they trade, and where they eventually live. The empire grows along these lines of stone. As you walk farther, you encounter a small group of travelers resting beside the road. One of them is an elderly man who asks whether you worked on the construction. You tell him that you did. He looks at the road and says it is a fine road. You thank him. He asks how long it took. You hesitate before answering because the number of months feels too large to explain. You tell him. He shakes his head and says he cannot imagine working that long on a single road. You almost tell him that you cannot imagine it either. Instead, you simply smile. He thanks you for the work because his journey will now be easier. Then he continues along the road. You watch him disappear. His words stay with you. Someone finally noticed. Not an emperor, not a general, not an engineer, just a traveler who understands that his journey has become easier because someone worked before him. You continue toward the settlement. As you approach the gate, the road becomes crowded. Shops are open. Merchants are calling to customers. Horses move through the streets. Children run along the edges. The town feels different from when you first arrived. The road has already brought new traffic. More carts are entering. More goods are being sold. Inns are becoming busier. The local market is larger. You hear people discussing travelers coming from distant regions. The road is already changing the economy of the settlement. You stand near the gate and watch the movement for several minutes. The workers built the road in silence.